In order to make policy decisions, the members of the fund need to know what the economic reality is. So the heart of the IMF's work is a regular consultation between the fund and each member country.
Review a bit the situation and how we should proceed in the days to come.
This is a group of IMF staff members in Washington preparing to leave on a consultation mission to a member country, Mexico. They're discussing economic trends and deciding which indicators will be particularly important. The following week, they arrive in Mexico City and begin reviewing economic data provided by the government. They'll want to see how the economy is performing, what areas have improved, and where potential trouble may lie. The mission consults with the country's financial leadership to get the critical input of the government's policymakers. Then, back in Washington, the team's report is presented to the membership through the executive board. Members discuss each country's policies, often critically, and make suggestions for how the country can improve its economic performance. While the fund cannot force its members to do anything, the suggestions of the board are taken seriously by members.
The peer pressure that one government puts on another, one finance minister puts on another finance minister, or one central banker on another central banker, is at the heart of how the fund as an institution can influence the behavior of governments.
It's seeing the greater good, the good of the whole system in this. If you've got bad policies, then sooner or later, everybody will suffer, including yourself. And therefore, I think it is what we would have called in an earlier day enlightened self-interest.
Consultations are carried out with each member once a year, from the smallest developing country to the largest industrial nation. Discussions take place even more frequently with the leading industrial nations because of their impact on the world economy.
How would you evaluate the inflation prospect?
Well, we're obviously following it very closely.
Those countries have such an important role in the world economy through their trade, through their investment, that it is absolutely essential that to the extent possible, their policies are harmonized and work together.
For the same reason, staff members at the IMF rely on these industrial nation consultations to prepare a biannual report called the World Economic Outlook. The report helps member countries coordinate their own policies with anticipated trends in the world economy.
What the report does, it highlights the interdependencies in the world economy. When one major country undertakes a specific policy measure, it impacts on the rest of the world. And obviously, therefore, the policy formation in this major country and in the rest of the world will need to take into account these effects.
The World Economic Outlook, the consultation process, and the meetings of the Executive Board and Board of Governors all help promote sound economic policies. But sometimes a country follows unsound policies, or it may suffer from external events such as depressed prices for its exports. That can result in a balance of payments problem, a shortage of foreign currency to buy goods from abroad. So another important function of the IMF is to help these countries with financial assistance. In August of 1982, Mexico had trouble paying the interest on its national debt. In effect, the country was at the brink of bankruptcy. That crisis was solved with financial assistance from the International Monetary Fund and the help of the United States. But Mexico was not alone. In the early 80s, developing countries around the world were hard-pressed to pay their debts. In 1983 and 84 alone, the IMF loaned $22 billion to member countries.
I think the countries of Latin America and Eastern Europe at that time would have drifted into major defaults, major, even worse cutbacks in trade. There might have been a breakdown of the international financial system at that time if the fund had not acted.
Countries with balance of payments problems turn to the IMF because it's the world's lender of last resort. a financial safety net. Members of the IMF share financial resources for the common good, just as they do policy advice and information.
It is an international credit union, a credit union of the member countries who pool their resources, much like the members of a credit union do, to help each other out in times of difficulty.
Most of the fund's money comes from members' contributions in the form of quotas. Each country's quota is based on its importance in the world economy. Wealthier countries pledge more and poorer countries less. The quota also determines a country's voting power at the fund. The larger a country's contribution, the more votes it has. In 1990, the membership decided to increase their quotas to a total of about $180 billion. This pool of members' contributions circulates to be used by members who need it, then paid back in and used again. Each member can borrow more than it puts in amounts related to its quota. Any member wishing to borrow from the fund must adjust its economic policies in a way that will help solve its balance of payments problem. This combination of financial assistance and economic reform is also critical to resolving debt problems.
The most crucial function of the fund today is its traditional role, namely to make sure that when a country is confronted with a time of crisis, with difficulties, if these countries accept to address the problem and to take the measures it has to take, then the international financing will be provided to this country. International financing, international support, and of course all appropriate advice to make its policy as accurate as possible.
In response to its financial crisis of 1982, Mexico embarked on a sweeping program of economic reforms, supported by financial assistance and advice from the International Monetary Fund. One of those reforms was import liberalization, opening the trade system to the outside world. This is the Multi-Panel Company in Monterrey, a division of Grupo IMSA. It manufactures building panels and doors for the domestic market and for export. A few years back, the company didn't make this particular door. That's because the steel for the doors comes from Great Britain, and the panels are stamped in the United States. Under the old system of Mexican protectionism, it was too difficult and expensive to bring these imports into the country. But now the government has reduced import restrictions and cut tariffs dramatically.
Some years ago, most of the goods that Mexico needed to import required, first of all, an import license, which was kind of troublesome to get. Now, most of the goods that Mexico needs to be imported do not require an import license. Second, most of the goods had very high tariffs. Now, because of Mexico's openness to the international markets, the import duties have been lowered very much. So many of the imported goods are competitive with Mexican-made goods.
As a result, Multi-Panel has a new product. Volume has increased, new workers have been hired, and the company is exporting and earning foreign currency for Mexico. Ghana also had a hard time in the early 80s, but a continuing program of economic reforms supported by the IMF has helped Ghana overcome many of its problems. This is the Scan-Style furniture factory in Mim, Ghana. Today, Scan-Style is Ghana's leading furniture exporter, but things weren't always so bright. In the early 80s, Scan-Style and other Ghanaian exporters suffered because the Ghanaian currency, the cedi, was greatly overvalued, at only 2.75 cedis to the dollar.
But back in those days, it was suicide to export, because if you exported and earning such a low return of 2.75 cedis to the dollar, there isn't any way that you could have managed to cover your cost or been competitive abroad.
Then the Ghanaian government instituted a crucial economic reform. It lowered the value of the currency to a more realistic rate. That meant that exporters like Paul Pepera would get more cedis for each dollar they earned, making it profitable to export.
In 1983, the price of this dining chair was $21. And when we exported this dining chair, $21, we were getting a return of 60 cedis for this chair. This same chair, even if you take the current same price of $21, now when we're exporting this chair, we're earning 6,500 cedis for our $21. So I think you can see the dramatic increase in our earnings, even if you take inflation into account.
Poland is another country that has embarked on a program of economic reforms with the support of the International Monetary Fund. In 1989, Poland faced a tremendous challenge: how to move from central planning to a market economy. One goal was to end the chronic shortages that had plagued Poland for years. Part of the problem was that prices were set by the state, not by markets. That gave producers, whether farmers or factories, little incentive to produce more of what consumers wanted. So on January 1st, 1990, the Polish government instituted a key reform. It freed prices from state control, allowing them to be determined by the market. The change brought almost instant results. Where before butcher shop shelves were empty, now meat overflows the counters in open-air markets. Items that were formerly in short supply, from meat to toilet paper to oranges and bananas, are now readily available. This change is now spreading to other sectors of the Polish economy as well.
I expect that the shortages, which were very widespread under the previous economic system, would disappear, and this is very important for the economic efficiency.
In supporting economic reforms around the world, the IMF serves as a lender of last resort to countries with balance of payments problems.
That balance of payment support initially was very, very critical. What I know is that in 1983, no bank was going to lend us money. Not that we could afford commercial bank money anyway.
But more importantly, financial assistance from the IMF can mobilize even greater resources from governments and banks. That's because donors see IMF-supported programs as a sign that countries are moving their economies in the right direction.
The agreement with the IMF was important because it opened the way towards the other assistance, because everybody waited for the approval of the IMF.
It means really a backing of the world, the international financial community, of our program. That's the catalytic effect where the IMF has a very constructive role.
And the IMF plays a vital role in providing advice and expertise to countries as they develop their economic reform programs.
They've always been there, acting both as an orchestrator of external sources of support and also as de facto an advisor to the Mexican government.
In addition to sharing views on policy and financial resources, members of the IMF share their collective expertise. Whether it's improving tax collection in Ghana, or advising on exchange rate policy in Mexico, or restructuring the banking system in Poland, the IMF provides technical assistance to members requesting it. It's a way of helping countries to strengthen their financial institutions.
By improving institutions, we ensure that economic adjustment programs continue and maintain their effects well beyond the expiration of the program.
Another important form of technical assistance is the IMF Institute. In classrooms at the IMF's Washington headquarters, government officials from all over the world come to gain specialized knowledge in economics and finance.
I take the responsibility of compiling government finance statistics back in my country. But that job was not something I learned formally. It was on the job. So by coming here, I know I'll be able to get the theoretical background as well as the practical knowledge. And that would deepen my understanding of the work that I will do when I go back to my country.
Many developing countries are still struggling with the debt burdens of the 70s and early 80s. But recently there's been new hope. In March of 1990, an historic agreement was signed in Mexico City. Mexico and its commercial bank creditors agreed to reduce the amount of Mexican debt outstanding, saving Mexico almost $2 billion per year. The International Monetary Fund advised Mexico in developing the agreement. Mexico was also the first to use a new form of financial assistance from the IMF, in which funds are specifically earmarked for reducing a country's debt.
but we are trying also to help them to reduce